Today, I want to read a story to you, a story that I wrote a couple of years ago, inspired by the Danish author Hans Christian Andersen, and also in regards to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The story is called The Emperor's New War. In a large country in the north, there lived an emperor who ruled over a land for many years. The emperor was loved and respected by many who lived in the country, and he saw himself as a good and appreciated leader. Naturally, the emperor lived a comfortable life of abundance and was very wealthy, just as an emperor should be. He considered himself a thoughtful leader who wanted the best for his country and his people. He wanted the country to be successful and for those who lived there to be well off as possible. He saw it as his responsibility to protect the country and its inhabitants. Meanwhile, in another somewhat smaller country in the south, there lived a king who was just like the emperor, lived a good life. The king, too, wanted to be a good leader for his country and his people, and naturally wanted them to be well off. Just like the emperor, the king wanted to protect his country and his people. The two countries had once been a single unified country, but it had been decided that it was better for them to be two separate countries. And so there was now a large country with an emperor and a somewhat smaller country with a king. The people of the two countries felt close to one another. They saw themselves almost as relatives. Ever since the day the emperor and the king's country had been divided, they had lived in peace with each other. Naturally, there had been conflicts between the countries over the years, but the conflict had been resolved through dialogue and negotiation without people risking their lives in any way. In some conflicts, however, the smaller country in the south had felt unfairly treated simply because it was a smaller country. In the king's somewhat smaller country, there were areas where people lived whom the emperor felt really ought to belong to the larger country. The emperor saw these people as his own folks, who had unfortunately ended up in the wrong country after the old united country had been split in two. As the good leader he believed himself to be, the emperor also wanted to help these people. He wanted them to be able to belong to what he considered their rightful country. Negotiations were held between the large and the somewhat smaller country to find a solution that both the emperor and the king could accept, but it proved impossible for them to reach an agreement. The emperor of the large country therefore believed that an easy way to get the result he wanted would be to use force and attack the smaller country in the south with his soldiers. After all, the emperor had far more soldiers and far more weapons than the king, and would surely win a war easily. The emperor believed that a small new war would quickly fix the problem, and that he would then be seen as a hero by his own people. But the king was not willing to give up so easily. He urged his loyal soldiers to fight back and sacrifice their lives for their king and their homeland. A new and bloody war had suddenly erupted, simply because the emperor believed he could help his people by having his soldier kill soldiers in the smaller country to the south. But it was not that simple. And it was not only soldiers who were killed. Even people who had no real stake in the conflict were caught up in the fighting. Some were forced to leave everything they had and flee their homes, as everything around them risked being destroyed by bombs. Reports of the emperor's and the king's war spread through news coverage and media around the entire world. Many people in other countries felt that it was the emperor and the large country in the north that was in the wrong. Several countries sent weapons and bombs to the king's country to be used in the fighting against the emperor's soldiers. At the same time, there were people and countries who instead believed the emperor was right. Suddenly, it was as though the whole world had been divided in two different sides. One side supporting the king and the other supporting the emperor. Both blamed the war on each other. Neither the emperor nor the king truly wanted there to be a war, yet both had many good explanations for why it was the other country's fault that war had come about anyway. Both the king and the emperor said they would gladly like to stop fighting, but even when it came to trying to end the war, it was difficult. Even when they wanted to stop, they blamed each other for why it wasn't possible. The war simply continued. Day after day, more and more people were wounded and killed. More and more cities, houses, roads, schools, and hospitals were destroyed by all the bombs that were detonated in both the emperor's and the king's countries. It was said that the war could not end until the other country gave up. Everywhere people talked about how peace would come the day one side won the war, but very little was said about simply stopping the fighting. There was a great risk that even more people would be forced to die before the war would come to an end. A peace without being the winner was unthinkable for both the emperor and the king. Neither of them was willing to endure the shame of being the one who lost. Instead, both countries built even more bombs and trained even more soldiers. Both the emperor and the king were willing to sacrifice more and more human lives, and both wanted to avoid the risk of being seen as weak or regarded as losers. What had originally been a conflict that they had tried to resolve through talking to each other had now instead developed into a deadly struggle that both said they were willing to fight to the last man, if that should prove necessary. Both countries still had many soldiers and much weaponry left that would be used in the fighting. Despite so many people dying in the war, it was still difficult to see that any country was drawing close to victory. Instead of starting new negotiations to bring an end to the killing, the emperor threatened to begin using his special bombs, which could destroy vast areas and kill enormous numbers of people with a single explosion. The king asked the countries that supported him to send more weapons and bombs to be used in defeating the emperor and his soldiers. Many had originally believed it would be a war that would quickly come to an end. But now, after several years of fighting, there was still nothing to suggest that an end was near. Fewer and fewer people could see how the war could ever come to an end, and instead more and more began to worry that the war could develop into a world war in which many more countries would be forced to begin killing each other. That the countries who thought the emperor was right would have to go to war against countries who thought the king was right. Countries that were not in any conflict with each other would suddenly be trying to kill and destroy each other's nations. If things went truly badly, perhaps the special bombs would begin to be used as well. Bombs that could kill large part of the world's population and render vast stretches of earth uninhabitable for a long time. A frightening but not entirely impossible development. What was certain, however, was that there was not a single person in the entire world who wanted this to happen. The future looked undeniably bleak. No one had any good proposal that they could agree on to bring an end to the bloody conflict. The hatred between the emperor and the king had grown so strong that they could not possibly accept each other. Both were prepared to sacrifice more of their soldiers and perhaps even the lives of every person on earth to prove through violence and death that they specifically were right. For that was how it was. Both the emperor and the king were so certain that they were right, while at the same time being convinced that the other was so wrong. The same was true for many people in large part of the rest of the world, where peace still held. Some were certain the emperor was right, and others were equally certain that the king was right. The hatred between the two groups grew even stronger. How could the war ever come to an end? No one knew what to do until the little girl spoke up. There was a girl in another country who had heard about the war and become frightened. She became even more frightened when she heard that perhaps they would even start fighting in her country too. She thought it sounded so horrible that people were just killing each other instead of trying to talk to one another. She found it strange that grown adults believe you could solve a problem by killing other people. Does the one who is the best at killing win? The girl wondered. Will those who are best at killing be the winners and then get to decide everything? The girl could not understand grown ups who said that children were not allowed to fight at school if they disagreed, but that adults were allowed to kill each other in war if they couldn't reach an agreement. How can that be? The girl wondered. Adults who heard the girl's question tried to explain to her why things were this way. They said it was more complicated than she could understand. The grown ups said that wars had always existed and always would, that it is natural for people to go to war sometimes, and there is nothing we can do to stop it, even if we want to. The girl cannot understand this either. Aren't people the ones who decide whether there is a war? If people decide to go to war, can't they also decide not to go to war? No one actually wants war, said the girl. Then the adult said that it doesn't matter what we want because there will always be power hungry people like the emperor and the king, and it is they who decide that war happens. But there are so many more of us, said the girl. Can the emperor and the king really go to war if everyone who doesn't want war says no? Other adults then try to explain that war exists because there is so much money to be made when countries fight each other. When there is war, enormous quantities of weapons and bombs need to be manufactured and sold, and certain companies can make enormous amount of money from this. That sounds foolish, said the girl. You can make money by making and selling things that are good for people too. Why can't they do good things instead? All the explanations the adults gave for why wars exist and why peace is impossible struck the girl as nothing more than poor excuses. Every adult said that they themselves also wanted peace, of course, but that it was always someone else's fault that it was impossible. It seemed as though there was nothing anyone could do to prevent war. It was as if the adults were just trying to pass the blame on to others. How can you say you want peace if you don't believe in it? The girl wondered. Everyone just says it's impossible. Don't you have to start by believing something is possible before it can become possible? With a feeling of resignation that no one seemed to think peace was as important as she did, the girl recorded a video, posted it on social media. In the video, she said, every person I've talked to says they would rather have peace than war. They say it's obvious that all people everywhere in the world want peace. If that's true, how can there be war? When children fight, adults tell us to stop and talk to each other instead? Can't the emperor and the king also talk to each other instead of telling their soldiers to kill? What gets better when lots of people kill each other? Do those who are best at killing win? And do they then get to decide everything? I don't understand. At first, nothing happened. But then someone sent a heart and shared the girl's video. And soon there were a few more who did the same. The question, which had started out as nothing more than a small whisper from the girl, was suddenly being heard from multiple directions. Soon it was not only children sharing the video, but adults as well. And those with many followers began sharing it too. The girl's whisper spread and grew into many loud voices heard by more and more people. More and more began to make their own videos and posting on social media asking, why do we allow war to happen if no one wants it? More and more people around the world began demanding that the emperor and the king talk to each other instead of letting soldiers kill one another. If we think children should resolve their conflicts by talking, surely adults can do the same. Even people in the large country in the north and people in somewhat smaller countries in the south began saying they no longer wanted to fight and be forced to kill or risk being killed themselves. Why should we have to die and have our lives and homes destroyed just because the emperor and the king don't want to talk to each other? More and more people began to realize how foolish and pointless the war was, and instead started demanding what we all want: peace. It was not important or powerful people saying this, but entirely ordinary people. People whom many believe no one listens to. But now, so many were saying the same thing. The more who spoke up, the harder it became for both the emperor and the king to explain to their soldiers why they should sacrifice their lives in a war that never seemed to end. Quite simply, no one any longer believed that all the killing in the emperor's new war could resolve the conflict between the emperor and the king's countries. It was not long before the emperor and the king realized that they needed to listen to the will of the people and stop fighting. Instead of continuing to try to resolve the conflict by having soldiers kill or be killed, they returned to talking with each other. It was not easy to find a solution that both could accept, but now that they had come to understand that war was not a good way to resolve the conflict, they were, despite everything, forced to find a solution through dialogue. From one day to the next, there was once again peace between the emperors and the king's countries and their people. Neither the king nor the emperor had won the war. The true winners were instead all the people in both countries who no longer had to hate and kill one another. And if no one has forgotten how foolish and pointless war truly is, there is still peace to this day. The end.